the United States and the Soviet Union on a sheet of ice in Lake Placid, New York.
Muller trying to turn. There's the left foot. What a cracking shot. Johnny Muller.
If you see a 9-9, Olga Korbut's won a gold medal. There it is.
5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
You're listening to a podcast from Key Moments in Cold War Sports History, an online archive series showcasing the work of expert historians. I'm Vince Hunt and I'll be hosting the series, asking each guest to choose an important document or artefact they think is of great significance in the Cold War sports arena. Some of the great soccer players of the Cold War period represented the colonial power that ruled their country. One example of this is the great footballer Eusébio, who played for Portugal in the 1960s. Todd Cleveland is a specialist in African history at the University of Arkansas, and he's made a particular study of Eusébio's career. Todd, Eusébio, absolutely top-class footballer.
Absolutely, sure. He was born and grew up in Mozambique, which was a Portuguese colony at the time in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, achieved independence in 1974 or 75. But Eusébio most famously played in Portugal for Benfica, a Lisbon-based outfit, and also for the Portuguese national team for a number of years before going on to play overseas in the post-colonial period at the end of his career. And as you indicated, he represented Portugal. Of course, Mozambique had no national soccer team at the time. It was a colony, although there was a colonial team that gathered periodically to play against other colonies, and occasionally from club teams from Portugal on tours of Africa.
But if you're a gifted footballer, you just want to play, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's we're tempted, I think, perhaps over-tempted to politicize this participation or this engagement with the game. And in fact, Eusébio was most vocal about the fact that football is his politics. He was very apolitical, as were many of these players, in fact, in sharp contrast to some of the Francophone African players who came to France and were got very heavily involved in politics.
And studying Eusébio as a footballer, do you watch films of him playing? What would you say would be his great attributes on the pitch?
Sure, yeah, it's really wonderful to go back and watch films. YouTube has been fantastic for just that purpose, and so many others, of course. But it's fun to watch the old games. He has such a powerful shot. He's significantly quicker than many of the other players against whom he's playing. Also a real nose for goal. I mean, he's kind of a poacher in a way too, which we wouldn't necessarily think of for such a world-class player, one of the best of all time. But he's clearly much more talented than the opposition in many, many respects. He also, perhaps like Messi, perhaps you could argue even Ronaldo, takes a fair amount of abuse on the pitch. I mean, he's just that much quicker with his feet, that much faster. And so he often has some very, very rough games, especially against international competition. 1966 and the World Cup in England, the Portuguese end up losing 2-1 in the semifinal versus England, versus the home team. There's an iconic image of Eusébio exiting the pitch, crying, clutching his Portuguese jersey. And so what's interesting about it to me is it's interesting on a number of levels. One is that he's commiserating with a white Portuguese member. It's this sort of a very anonymous member of the team. And so it suggests this sort of cooperation, commiseration, camaraderie in a way that's very incongruent with our understandings of the colonial period at that time. This is a time when there are wars being fought for independence in Mozambique, in Eusébio's home country or colony, in Angola and Guinea as well. So this is against this political backdrop, this cooperation and this commiseration, that transcends race and so many other things, against this very severe, grave political backdrop.
And what was the feeling in Mozambique when Eusébio is playing for Portugal at that level? I mean, that's quite some level to be playing at in the World Cup.
Sure, there's a great deal of pride among Mozambicans, among both black and white Mozambicans. The white settlers in the colonies were often treated as sort of second-class citizens. These were folks who generally couldn't make things work in Portugal and were sent off or sought opportunity in the colonies. And so there was a great deal of pride among the white settlers as well. And so there was a sense of, he generated a sense of Mozambican nationalism, not just him, but some of the other players as well. But it was a very difficult time for him in the sense that these wars were raging, and all these players for that matter, and they didn't really want to get involved in the politics of the day. For the most part, some of them did, but not many at all. You could count on one hand.
One of the things that Eusébio left behind was a legacy. I mean, he is considered to be one of the great footballers in England. So he certainly made an impact
Absolutely, yeah. FIFA ranked him number 9 as in their greatest all-time list, and so actually Mario Coluna, one of the other players, appears on the top 100 list, also deriving from Mozambique. So there's a great footballing legacy that Eusébio leaves behind, but also a different sort of social legacy and labor legacy. I mean, if you really kind of get into his day-to-day experiences beyond the sort of famous moments on the pitch.
Eusébio is one of those characters who, maybe like Ronaldo, is unfortunate, maybe like Gareth Bale as well, is unfortunate to play for a national side that isn't quite at the top table. Do you think Eusébio is a player who maybe didn't quite reach the level, the international stage that he should have played on?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think 66 is the closest they get, and afterwards, they never sort of get close again. At least in terms of his career, that Portugal doesn't sort of ascend again in world soccerdom until much more recently, 2004 Euro Cup, for example. I think injuries took a toll on Eusébio. His knees were operated on a number of times, and so by the late 60s, his skills are deteriorating. He's no longer sort of has the constitution or the endurance that he once had. So yeah, I think it's a career that was littered with many wonderful moments, but I think there's probably some potential that was unfulfilled and majorly or primarily attributable to some of the knee injuries that he incurred.
He died quite recently, didn't he? What do you think his legacy is?
Oh, gosh. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. I think his football legacy is certainly secure. I guess part of this research will hopefully prompt folks to look into other aspects of his life, the sort of challenges he had. I mean, he's sort of a Jackie Robinson figure in many ways, not just him, but this group of players, the very acute social challenges that they faced. Not only, I mean, this isn't a matter of growing up in the same country in which you play. I mean, they're going thousands of miles away into what's in a sense somewhat familiar but largely an alien environment, and so they had many more challenges off the pitch than they did on it, and I think that's part of the legacy that this generation of African players should rightfully leave behind.
What was the kind of journey that these African players had to make in these Portuguese times? Did they relocate to Lisbon into training academies, and from there were trained and filtered into the national squad? Did they play for club sides?
Sure. It was oftentimes a very multi-segmented journey, not only in terms of the logistics. Oftentimes they had to take boats from southern Africa, and it took them over a month to arrive in the capital. Some of them stayed in Lisbon and played. Others went north to Porto. Others went into the interior, the sort of sparsely populated Portuguese interior, to play. Oftentimes they would start out on the reserves, and if they proved their worth, would be quickly elevated to the senior level. But many of them never made it. I mean, of course, there are many untold stories of players, just as there are now, who make these sort of massive, profound moves, intercontinental moves, but whom we never end up hearing about because they don't make it all the way to the top, just shy.
There are many cab drivers in Lisbon, I imagine.
Exactly. And many of the players in this time, if they didn't succeed as footballers in Portugal, were required to go back to the colonies. There was no room for them to just stay in Portugal and work and attend school or anything like that. The stipulation was if they were to stay, then they could parlay that opportunity into some other opportunities, educational opportunities or occupational remunerative opportunities. But if they didn't succeed on the pitch, those quickly disappeared, and they were forced to return to their respective colonial settings. At the time, Mozambique and Angola were producing world-class players, and those talent pools dried up over time. So Portugal still actively mines the African talent market, namely the Lusophone countries. But the fact is that there are no more great players coming out of those nations. And so it's not so much that Portugal necessarily did or didn't do something or deviated from a path that was working quite well, but in fact the talent, in a sense, just dried up.
You've been listening to a podcast from the series Key Moments in Cold War Sports History, a project bringing together experts from around the world and hosted here on the Wilson Centre's online digital archive at digitalarchive.org. These podcasts are part of the project The Global History of Sport in the Cold War, which is sponsored by the National Endowment of the Humanities, directed by Professor Bob Edelman of UC San Diego, Professor Chris Young from the University of Cambridge, and Dr. Christian Ostermann of the Woodrow Wilson Centre, and run in collaboration with the German Historical Institute Moscow, the Jordan Centre for Advanced Russian Studies at New York University, and Pembroke College, University of Cambridge. The presenter is Vince Hunt, and the series is produced by Vince Hunt and Laura Dale.